Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that sells tales from games, books, and life. And also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by. I am super excited. Ever since an announcement came a couple of months ago, immediately I reached out to this man. I wanted to talk to him. So this is a little bit of a unique podcast relative to what you might be used to on this channel, One Stop Co-op Shop, and I'll explain all that before we get into the main body of the show. But I want to introduce my guest first. He is the, I guess, managing editor. I didn't actually get your title. Something grandiose. There's something grandiose about your title.
Sure. It's really great to be here, Jason. My name is Ajit George, and I am the creator, creator, co-project lead, and one of the writers for the upcoming D&D book, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel.
All right. So we have the creator. We have, I talked to a couple of people. They're like, oh, no, talk to Ajit. Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. So one of the unique things that I wanted to just let people know ahead of time, this is a primarily board gaming podcast. So we're not going to talk about board gaming specifically in this show. We're going to focus on more on the RPG D&D end. The reason I wanted to do this show, a couple of reasons. Number one, we have a lot of adventure gamers who listen to Shelf Stories, and also the One Stop Co-op Shop. And so on our channel, we are a pretty big YouTube channel, and we get a lot of pitches for people with their Kickstarters and their products and everything. And I'm going to say this as nice as I can. I really want people to open their minds to different kinds of adventures. It does not all have to be grimdark. It does not all have to be elves and dwarves and medieval fantasy. And all the other tropes like that. I think people kind of get in that box. And so it's like, okay, how can I make a positive contribution and help kind of lead people in a direction of something different? And so, I have to open up the the cupboard a little bit because, in our little hobby, we don't have as much resources. So I wanted to reach over to the RPG space. So my friend over here has released an awesome new supplement, which is coming out soon from WotC, the big flagship themselves. So that's why I wanted to invite Ajit George on here. So please, please accept the spirit in which I'm offering this episode, something different in the adventure space. But before we get to that, I want please introduce us to yourself, how you got into gaming, how you got into D&D writing. Let us know a little bit about your personal journey.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Jason. Thank you so much. As I said, my name is Ajit George, and my full-time job is Director of Operations for a nonprofit called the Shanti Bhavan Children's Project. It's an educational and poverty alleviation nonprofit, which is based in India, and which probably sounds a little weird for like, how does that fit into gaming? And I'll get to that in a second, but that's my full-time job. In the world of games, I was a D&D player since I think first, second grade. I'm just trying to remember. Every interview, I'm asked, when did you start playing D&D? And it's like, well, I remember getting that red box, that iconic red box, probably first or second grade. And then, I think played a little bit here and there. I was blown away with it. It was weird and interesting, but I didn't have people to play with.
Did you grow up here in the States? Did you grow up?
Yeah. I was the first child from both sides of my family born in America. I was born in New York City and grew up in New Jersey mostly. And so really struggled to fit in, especially as when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of Indians. I'm a little older, so not a lot of Indians growing up in the areas that I was living in. And so often I was, one of the only brown kids around, and I was also a geek, and that combination was a little bit of a struggle to find my people, and find that community that accepted me and wanted me in it, and that I felt, part of. So gaming was that outlet, and I really hit my stride in high school and played a lot of D&D there, and loved it, and continued with other games. But I started writing for games. And really thinking about bigger questions in games about 10 years ago. It was going to Gen Con, and my first Gen Con ever, had a blast, loved it, but also didn't see a lot of other brown or black people there. And you get 60,000 people, and you could go rooms and rooms and tables and tables and not see another brown person. And I was
Especially
a
in a
little
Gen
surprised.
Con. I mean, Gen Con is
Yeah,
in the middle of Indianapolis, Heartland, America.
yeah,
And, you're pulling, I know Gen Con pulls from a lot of different corners, but you're primarily
right,
pulling from that
right,
center of the country, Heartland. And that's where D&D was born,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
that's where a lot of role-playing game and a lot of, fantasy gaming and all sorts of stuff was born. So it's like, I think, for our audience and in gaming audience, they're hearing this and it's like, okay, why does that matter? Or it just trust us.
yeah. I think you want to find people that maybe understands a little bit of your story, right? Like
Right.
that understands a little bit about your own background, or understands different cultural elements that connect with you, right? And that makes a difference at the table, or just feeling comfortable and not being like somebody's going to say something randomly accidentally offensive. Like they're not trying to be racist on purpose, but like when you get a table with a couple other brown people, they're not going to say the thing that's like accidentally racist or going to be offensive just without thinking about it.
Right.
There's a lot of comfort with having other brown and black people at the table, and that was what I was looking for. And I was disappointed at Gen Con, so it made me think about it, and then I decided I would do something about it, and I started writing about it. And then Gen Con invited me to join their guest of honor committee to kind of help solve some of their problems, which were getting more brown and black people, more women on their guest of honor lists, their roles. And I contributed pretty heavily to that. And 2016, we had the first Industry Insider. That was the Industry Insider like guest of honor list was sort of their big speaker series. And I was able to help get gender parity for women in it, and get more brown and black people on that list. And Mike Pondsmith was the guest of honor that year. It was a pretty powerful moment. Simultaneously, I started writing for games, and that was pretty powerful because my first time I ever wrote for a game, I wrote a city, like an urban fantasy city guide to the city of Bangalore in India, right? That had never been done. In fact, I think I'm certainly one of the first people of Indian origin to write like a city guide to an Indian city. Before I did it, I didn't really see. I'd seen some white guys take a shot at it, but like it was pretty clear that had never been in India, and then much less never been to the city that like they're writing about, right? So
Right.
they're trying to put it together from like maybe an encyclopedia article or whatever pieces of information they could get online or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the city of Bangalore. Like I'm there twice a year, right? I walk those streets. I know those people. I know the culture. I know the restaurants. I know the temples. I know the nightclubs. I know what that city looks like and what it feels like and the vibe of it. And I was able to put that in the city guide authentically, and that was a lot of fun. And I just kept on writing from there.
I just apologize. So we're just getting to know each other. So I'm Puerto Rican, but I love India, and that was my first international trip. I spent 6 weeks in Pune.
Great.
And also Bombay. So like, all the different areas and traveling around.
Yeah.
It is a trip, people. I mean, when you see like miles and miles of traffic just stop short because a cow has decided to cross the road. When you see a 5-lane highway, quote unquote, with like, the rickshaws and the bicycles and, the cars that don't have like blinkers because they just use their horn and, get yourself ferried that way. It is a trip to be in an Indian city or an Asian city or South Asian city. You got to go. You got to go, and B, it really helps to be there. Right. So we're going to get to the cultural stuff, like the actual like culture talk on the back half, because I think people want to know like what they're getting and the actual adventure stuff. And where this could be useful kind of in terms of realizing games. We'll get to the culture stuff in the back end. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know, just jump in there, be like, you're talking and you're talking my language. I'm back
there. That's awesome. That makes me so happy. You got to check out Bangalore one of these days. I'm mostly in the South when I'm in India, but I love the country as a whole. And it's almost like 30 countries stitched together. It is very, very different from wherever you are, the city you're in. But most recently, I wrote I've been writing for a bit and gotten, to know people, and they appreciated my writing and my thoughts around writing for games. And I got invited to write for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I knew the project lead on that, Wes Snyder, for a few years. He respected my work, and we were friends. And I also knew Jeremy Crawford at the same time. So
Jeremy Crawford being the basically
one of the two game architects for Dungeons and Dragons. He is head of all rules for D&D. So any kind of role in D&D, that is his creation, and that's his purview. So I got invited to write for Van Richten's. Really loved writing for Van Richten's because Wes, did something kind of bold. He said, hey, look, Ravenloft has got 20, 30 years of history. It's just one of these iconic locations in D&D. But I don't want to do the same thing again and again and again, right? So many people have reinterpreted like, Bavaria or any of the countries that are any of the domains of dread that are there, right?
Yeah, and Ravenloft being like a place where it's like you mentioned Bavaria, vampires, kind of a darker end of things as the sunrise and all that kind of thing, and it kind of a plane exists. I don't know, parallel to the regular plane or whatever it is, but it is an alternate place, but has a very much darker, more gothic type of spin. And like in terms of like things we've seen over and over again, I think Gothic is definitely one of the things that you can pretty much guarantee in an adventure game. We're going to see it at some point.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of those kind of like you've seen Ravenloft done again and again by writers and reinterpreting it. And I wanted to do something a little different. And so I talked to Wes and I said, hey, I would love to write an original domain based on India, on a part of India. Not like I can't capture all of India in one domain, but I can capture like a snapshot of India from a snapshot part of like a certain part of history. And I'd love to do that. And he said, yeah, go for it. He gave me that permission and he encouraged me. And I loved creating a new domain, the domain of Calicari. And as I was working on that, it got to me, it was like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome to have a whole D&D book written by people like myself, like people of color who don't usually get to write for D&D, creating new lands and areas based on their cultures, their histories, their myths and legends, and build it out and see where they go with that. So after I finished Ravenloft, I pitched that idea to both Wes and Jeremy. And to my surprise, they greenlit that idea and let me run with it. They said, hey, we want you not only to like write for this, we want you to be one of the project leads for this, but we want you to do it through adventures, right? Like you'll have that section that kind of talks about this new city, this new land, but also the best way to get to know a new land is the stories that you tell in that new land. And, putting adventures in those new lands that lets the players kind of play in those new lands and really immerse themselves culturally in them. And so that was how kind of the genesis for Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. And I had incredible latitude and authority over the project. The vision's mine. I had to pick my team, kind of build out from there. Work closely with Wes, who really, his expertise is how do you create a D&D book and make sure that it is right for D&D? How do you make sure those stories are the right stories? And we're actually making sure those adventures are playable by players. But he and I closely collaborated with our great team of writers and built what was a historic book. This is the first book in D&D's almost 50-year history, written solely by people of color, and with a team overall. There are 50 people of color who worked on this book in some form or the other. The writers, artists, editors, project leads, a whole across the board, art directors. It was pretty amazing how many people came together that are Black or brown or from a different ethnicity.
Talk about the countries of origin. I'm very interested in, like, I'm a big person in locality, right? I mean, because we're going to talk about the toys, right? The monsters and the adventures as much as we can.
Right.
NDA, right? But just to give us a beginning sense of where the people are from, so that we can start to sense like what they're pulling from and ultimately what's going to be on our tables.
Sure. Well, we've got two writers from Mexico, both of them actually living in Mexico, but different parts of Mexico. So they're drawing from different backgrounds of Mexico to create very different lands. You know, I think people get this, stereotype, well, oh, if it's from India, it's going to just be like this one thing. No, right? India's like 20, 30 countries
Rakshasas. That's what we're going to get.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. There are no Rakshasas in this book. Same with Mexico. Mexico is so diverse and complex histories. And so there's these two Mexican writers taking it from different angles. We got a Filipina writer. We have two writers from India, one born and brought up in India. I'm not including myself. I worked on sort of one of the centerpieces, but we'll talk about that in a second. But two writers of different backgrounds from India, one drawing from a Hindu culture, one drawing from Muslim culture. We had a Japanese writer, a Chinese writer, Korean writer, a Argentinian. She was I think a mix of Argentine and Venezuelan. I think she's biracial. And then we have 4 Black writers. So you're getting a whole host of different people with different backgrounds tackling it from different perspectives. So like our Black writers took different perspectives on the pieces they did. One was deeply inspired by the American South, another by the Caribbean, 2 by different parts of Africa, taking on different areas of Africa, different pieces of their history and evolution. So the writers are just kind of tackling it from a number of different angles. And what you end up getting is just really rich, wonderful lands with adventures and stories set in them.
Okay. So then I'm a longtime DD player myself. And I remember I'm a lore book person. So ever since I was young, I'll go to the store and be like, okay, give me the Dark Sun, give me the Eberron, give me Forgotten Realms, give me, Greyhawker. Like I love reading the source books. So a lot of these worlds had multiple places. Like you think about the Forgotten Realms, right? Like they would be these continents that had like basically like dark with a big question mark if they were kind of like that along the way. But they would take a stab at the different cultures. And inevitably, the further you get from the center, the more you got the stereotypes. So you got like, okay, you're talking about Japan, let's talk about samurai. You're talking about, I just made the joke about Rakshasas, you talk about India, we're talking about Rakshasas, which is a creature that comes out of the Vedic lore. If you're talking about Mexicans, you talk about Quetzalcoatl, or like, the most obvious, Aztec stuff.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's not, none of this is wrong, right? I mean, this is all like, right. They're all there, but it's the only thing, right? And it's almost like the culture reduced to those things. So like what you're talking about is doing that again, but with people who are from those areas, know those areas, and you're going to see the difference in terms of how much 3D you're going to get.
Yeah, I would say that in many ways these are just not their takes on these areas were actually not stereotypical or not your superficial take that people are often really used to, right? There is nothing that like that's Aztec Empire inspired. There are samurais in the Japanese one, but like they're not the centerpiece of that piece.
Right.
They're riffing on very different themes here with each of the locations that like are built into there. And you just get some really new takes. Like one location is inspired by Thailand and another by Iran. And both Thailand and Iran, I think you don't usually see in D&D adventures as much or in fantasy settings as much. And so, Justice Arman, who was the Iranian designer, really captured a piece of Iran that was very unique and has some really complex moral questions. And Serena Marie, who did Thailand, she kind of she riffed off the Bangkok night market and did some pretty amazing things there.
So talk a little bit about that translation, right? I mean, how do you? I mean, I imagine that's a too big a question, but I don't know another way to say this. Like, I can see the instinct to be like, okay, my city is this. I'm going to make the fantasy version of this. right? And it becomes a little bit of a one-to-one, right? So, I mean, is that bad? Is that, I mean, how do you think about that kind of question?
Yeah. So I gave some very specific vision guidelines. I was very specific about the structure of the book, right? Like I spent like a couple months thinking about and gestating on how I wanted the book to come out before I even started writing, before I started even pulling in the other writers. And so there's some very strict ground rules. And I said, like, hey, first of all, I'm not looking for a one-to-one, right? I'm not looking for you just to transport like, like the Aztec Empire into D&D, right? You've got to like go deeper and more complex, and you've got to like think about how some of these civilizations, if they were in a fantasy world, how they would have evolved and how they would have been their own thing without just being like, okay, I've just dropped out. Like Mexico's now in D&D, right? Like that is not how it played out. It's very different from that aspect. So one of the elements from that we're looking at here is like this riff on a northern Mexican city that is in like it's kind of almost got a steampunky kind of feel, right? Like it's steampunk Mexico, northern Mexico, riffing off a little bit of like the Day of the Dead, but it's drawn from multiple different cultural elements, but it's doing its own thing that is pretty unique, but you definitely get the flavor, or you definitely understand the cultural roots of Mexico in there. And you see that again and again from each of the writers. They really pulled on their own. And then my centerpiece, which I wrote, was the Radiant Citadel, and that's the location that like links all of these locations. Kind of maybe to take a step back, I should kind of talk about that. The Radiant Citadel is this weird city that resides in the ethereal plane. And for your viewers, if they're not familiar with D&D, like there's like the material plane where all of the the worlds exist, and then the ethereal plane is this weird almost ghost-like plane that like links all the worlds and different planes together. And the Radiant Citadel is built from the fossil of a giant creature that went extinct, that wrapped itself around a diamond shard. And in its dying days, it wrapped itself around this diamond shard that was giving life-giving energy. So that's why I did it. And then it finally died, and it got fossilized. And then, centuries later, a new people found this and decided to carve a city out of the body of this beast. And they built this powerful ancient city. And it's 27 civilizations that did it. They all kind of came together and built this. I almost think of it like a fantasy New York City in some ways, right? You think about like all the different cultures that came together to make that city what it is. Similarly, the Radiant Citadel is like, it's a conglomeration of a bunch of different cultures that have agreed to share the city and work together in building the city together. And it wasn't originally in the ethereal plane. There's like a lot of myths and like legends as to where it came from, what was used for, and all of that, but it ends up in the ethereal plane. And then it was abandoned. And then many thousands of years later, like the descendants of those original creators of the city rediscover it, and some of them rediscover it, but there are missing civilizations still. Like out of that 27, only 15 find it. And they rebuild. They're starting to rebuild and kind of reactivate the powers of the city. And then they're rebuilding it, and then it becomes the centerpiece that like it can link to all of the other locations. And some of those locations are not actually in the same world. There's multiple worlds. It's a multiverse, and so there's multiple worlds. And it links through these gemstone kind of ships, these different worlds, and that's how you play the whole book, right? You start off in the Radiant Citadel, and then you can transport to any one of those locations and have an adventure there. Go back to the Radiant Citadel, and then go to the next location in the book and have an adventure there. But the Radiant Citadel also is an opportunity for like players to explore what it means to be in a multicultural city. That has to kind of negotiate social norms, has to negotiate laws, how to share resources. I think there's some interesting questions there, and that's what I created with that.
And I'm so glad you mentioned about New York City. I'm from New York City.
Oh yeah,
So yeah, so I think like in terms of helping creators or helping develop their own properties, or game players, asking for something better. Um, Avoiding the one-to-one, like it would have been easy to make the Radiant Citadel like actual New York City. So like here's the pie points and here's the
yeah.
this quarter, that quarter. And it's like, okay, like let's take a step back, go a little bit deeper, as you were saying, and talk about, okay, what is the vibe of New York City? What is the emotional reality of New York City? And New York City is a city of immigrants, right? So
Yeah.
the groups come, and then they make roots, and then they get more prosperous, and they move elsewhere, and another group comes
Yeah.
and they get more prosperous, and so like you have that flow, and each group leaves a remnant, so you're going to encounter some form of it, but it gets incorporated into the other thing, like you get all sorts of wonderful fusions that arise from a lot of stuff. So like if you understand that dynamic more than understanding just like the actual surface stuff, you could create something really cool. And it sounds like the Radiant Citadel is not just like multiculturalism, like, okay, the elf quarter, the dwarf quarter, because that's the way it usually is. It's like, okay, they're
Yeah.
just kind of like is separated here. And this gets into like some of the actual stuff, like, because I remember reading something about you wanted to create a field of thinking about community and how to build community and how communities coexist, and like really putting players in that space.
100%. And you really hit on a bunch of different things. And I'll give your viewers a little bit of a teaser that like I haven't really done. This is a section called Life in the Citadel, and I'll just read through it. It's a little bit. The Radiant Citadel is a city of immigrants. Several of the explorers who claimed the Citadel were refugees who escaped hardships that plagued their lands. They chose the Citadel as their home, despite its strangeness and surreal surroundings of the deep ethereal, and as it presented an opportunity to start anew. Most of the city's current inhabitants are descendants of the 15 founding civilizations active in the Citadel, but all are welcome. Some find living in the deep ethereal too disquieting to stay, or they chafe at the confines of the Citadel. Others depart out of fear. There's something going out there that I won't spoil that. Out of fear of something, there's a danger to the city too. Their numbers are replenished by new arrivals who seek a different life, who want to study the city's lore or find solace in the city's peace and safety. The Citadel's society is shaped by this ebb and flow. Traditions, customs, and values are a mix of old and new. While some adhere to the rituals no longer followed in their homelands, others create their own novel practices. And so, like you kind of described it, right? This is, and then I actually talk about fusion.
Once you said New York City, once you said New York City, I'm like, I know it.
There's a section about fusion right in this, and I talk about how, the city has like this mix of cultures and this fusion, and like it's also a city of like, I wrote this. We started this in 2020. So, we're definitely struggling with some conversations that were going on in America. And so that's, what is our relationship to people who are in need, who want to come into our country, right? And, the auroral diamond, which is like the center, right? Like it's just this creature that's wrapped around this giant diamond shard. There's some artwork around it that's floating around. You can take a look at it. And the auroral diamond is bright, and it's radiant, and it kind of goes across the entire ethereal plane. The ethereal plane is dark and gloomy and kind of scary. And your auroral diamond is this beacon of light that you can see pretty much potentially if you're looking for it anywhere in the ethereal plane. I mean, maybe you have to look for a while, but you'll eventually see this light. And I created this, and then after I finished creating it, I was like, I think I'm talking about the Statue of Liberty. I realized it afterwards, like what the Statue of Liberty is supposed to mean. I think that's what I was going at with the auroral diamond. And at the very beginning of the book, there's this sort of like kind of like this joke disclaimer that always comes in front of every D&D book. And Wes said, hey, can you do a disclaimer for the book? And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? He's like, well, you can do whatever you want. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's more serious, but do what feels right to you. So I did this disclaimer. There's no guarantee that the light of the Radiant Citadel will be visible to the naked eye on your plane of existence, but know that it is there, whether seen or not. And that's when you ask me about hope, or what it means about hope. I think that's what I'm getting at with this book and with the Radiant Citadel. You know, we've been what, a couple of years, 3 years, several years into a pretty dark period of time, and a lot of people say, you know, is there hope? What's the future for America? What's the future for this world? And I think, you know, the pandemic beating down on us, and a lot of, you know, really hard political issues coming at us. We are filled constantly with dread and darkness, and maybe one response is grimdark. A lot of grimdark, just be like, okay, well, it's going to be the end. Let me just jump in on that and embrace that.
I can tell you from I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I can tell you like what we're seeing here on our channel and what's being released. I mean, it's like, okay, the people are kind of retreating into, you know, hack and slash and murder. And I mean, I get it, you know, I get it. Like, that's like a, you know, minus they're indulging certain feelings that people are having. And that's kind of where people are. That's why it's another reason why I wanted to reach out to you, because it just from the opening materials and reading through whatever it was, you are doing something different. You are trying to bring something that is not being represented.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly what I was trying to get with this, Jason. Like, you know, one of the first themes of in science fiction and like the punk genre is cyberpunk, and that's, you know, there's sort of this rebellion against, like, you know, technocratic overlords, and kind of having that conversation of what corporations look like when they take over. I think the ultimate act of rebellion in the face of darkness is not to embrace that darkness and go like, okay, well, that's what life is just going to be, so I'm just going to go with this and just go as dark as possible. But is to be radically hopeful and go, I'm going to fight the darkness with hope. I'm going to fight the darkness with light, and I'm going to believe that there's a better future, because I think the darkness in like the authoritarian leaders, they want you to have no hope and to just obey, right, and just follow. But when you have this radical sense of hope, you can see joy in your daily life, and you can visualize a future for yourself that is better than this future. And when you can start dreaming of a better future, then maybe you can start acting out towards that better future. And I think that's what this book is about. At least that's my hope, right? The Radiant Citadel itself is solar punk. And if your viewers don't know what solar punk, that definition is, there's a few different definitions, but it's sort of like, it envisions a future where that city or that land or that people have figured out solutions to their problems, and they're in collaboration and in harmony with the environment around them to find that solution, right? And it says, it doesn't say there's new problems, right? There are still problems and risks and dangers, but it says, hey, we have found some solutions to the greatest existential threats, the biggest threats right now, and we know how to work together to fight against this darkness and go forward. And I think that's the Radiant Citadel is a solar punk city. Like, it's pretty, things are going pretty well on there. There's some risks, some big risks, but otherwise, like, the city itself has figured out how to work collaboratively together.
Okay. So you walked into my next question, because I know people are going to ask. Okay. Threats. D&D, at the end of the day, I want to kill stuff. I used to be a DM and I did public D&D. So I went with, you know, many, many different groups, and they're not showing up going, I want to go in a multicultural vision and, you know, love and hug each other. I was like, okay, let's lay down some maps. I want to kill some orcs.
Sure.
You know, so, okay. So I know we're not going to get into like specific details, because the supplement's not out yet. It's coming out next month. I think July 5th is the current thing, and this will release in June. But I think people really want to know, how can I, like, what is the killing? What are the threats? What is there like an ultimate evil in this area?
There is definitely some pretty dark and monstrous things going on. You know, the Radiant Citadel being solar punk is like, think about a video game. Like, you go in there and like, there's a lot of bad stuff you find in a video game, but there's usually a home base, like a place where you can kind of retreat to and everything's going to be okay. And you can like rest up, rearm yourself, get your party back together, and then, you know, go attack again, right? The Radiant Citadel is your home base. And so that's why it's solar punk. But the rest of the locations, and there are 15 locations and 13 adventures, are dealing with some pretty complicated stuff, right? And so, you know, Erin Roberts, she's got an adventure called Written in Blood, and I can't give away too much about it. Yeah. It is very dark. It is like gothic horror, and it is like it just takes you through like some pretty monstrous things that are happening to this town, and you've got to help them solve a mystery and then deal with the monster that's behind there. And you've seen the art, and the creature is called the Soul Shaker, and the art for it is lots of hands, too many hands, and doing some really awful things. And I think that is a kind of great monster. There's another monster that I really dig, and it's a complicated monster because it's an angel. But I think of it, it's sort of like an angel in almost the biblical sense, where like angels can be pretty unforgiving, and if you cross them, they will f you up. And this is an Iranian angel called the Pari, and it very much expects you to like do what it tells you to do, and if you do not do what what it tells you to do, you may end up on the wrong side of its holy wrath. And so I think that it asks some really tough questions about like, do you want to follow this? Like, is its religion the right path? Is it telling you what you should be doing, or should you be questioning it? Like, and then some really good some really good complexities there.
And that's I mean, celestial beings, right? I think that's a good lens through which to understand like what a multicultural vision can offer, because every culture has them. Every culture has some take on celestial beings. So like angels, they're not understood. Like, from a Muslim perspective, they're a lot different than from a, different Western traditions. And then you have, bodhisattvas and all the kind of other stuff. So then, and if you do it from one perspective, then they're all going to kind of look the same. So it's like, okay, this pantheon, that pantheon, that pantheon, and they're all kind of like there, like Kratos style, just there to be killed. And they all do it. They all act the same way. But if you have people from those different areas reaching into like their cultural understanding of those celestial beings, you'll get different, like really different takes. So and that's what you're angling at, right? Like we're in for that kind of thing where like, we're getting really different takes. You're still gonna roll your D20. And it's still all that stuff.
You are, but we're also thinking like, this is 2022, and we know players have been playing D&D for a long time, and they're so used to killing like, with the big bad, and they're so used to like just the easy, obvious answers. And like these adventures are pretty like we know you're smart, right? We were treating you like adults. We're treating our players like adults. So like they're complicated. Like it becomes like, you're like, oh man, I'm in some tough decisions, and it's not so like easy to make like the right call. Like there's a new dragon in here, and I'm not going to spoil anything else about it except that it's a new dragon. It's badass as hell. There's a few ways to approach it. You can just go, toe to toe and kill it, right? But is that the right answer in this situation? It has some really tough questions about like what is going on behind the scenes with this dragon. Is it is everything exactly like it appears it is? And that's just because we know people have been playing D&D for 50 years, and so we want to give them something new rather than just run through the same dungeon for the 50th time. You don't need to buy this book if you just want to run through a dungeon and kill a bunch of monsters, easily. Like, there's so many other books out there, and you can just make your own, right? This is actually going to do a lot of new things for you, and it's going to defy your expectations. It's going to treat you like an adult, that you're smart, you're capable of like looking at things from a different angle, like with some nuance. I think it's going to blow people's expectations away. Like they're just going to just get something out of it, from the monsters there, right? And from the villains there. There's a lot of complexities there, and I think it kind of speaks to our time.
And I think there is a hunger there. I think that there's a lot of people from a lot of different cultures, and even like the Gen Con, like Heartland, whatever. I think that when I hear what they're asking for, like they are asking for more adult adventures. Like they don't just like, some of them, of course they want to like, hack and slash and everything. And that's be part of it. I don't think we can stray too far away, but at least it's not cookie cutter villains. There's multiple pathing. If I want to go really dark, then I can go really dark, and I can have moral choices. I do think that there is a hunger for that beyond like, just the cultural end of things. And so that's cool that you're like, actually, that's the first time I'm actually hearing about that Journey Through the Radiant Citadel actually wants that. A more adult take on adventuring and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a more adult take. Like, I mean, this is a kid-friendly book on one level, And like, you know, if an adult's running this for a bunch of kids, or like kids are running for themselves, they'll get through it without like.
There's no 20-breasted monsters. There's
Yeah,
no
yeah.
like,
It's
there's nothing
nothing
like that.
There's no cheap thrills in here. There's nothing that's like, you know, offensive in that regard. You're gonna be okay. But like for the adult player, they're gonna read this book like 6 times. You're like, and I can take my players to the next level with this. And I think that's what they're gonna get excited by.
Nice.
And it can get pretty dark. Like we go to the farm realm, which is you know, if your viewers are not familiar with it, it's sort of like, the best way to say is like sort of like a realm of chaos. Like it's like a Cthulhu realm, right?
Yeah, we know Cthulhu. We got Cthulhu all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a Cthulhu realm. Right. And it's doing something. I've read a ton of Cthulhu adventures. It's doing something I've never seen in a Cthulhu adventure.
Cool.
So that's going to be super freaking exciting to see what's going on with that. And there's a couple different monsters going on there, and they're awesome. Very dark, very creepy. It is going to mess with your mind.
Yeah, but that home base that is still there.
Yeah, right? The home base, the Radiant Citadel. I think like, so I sometimes hear people go like, "Oh, I really want to go dark. I want to go so dark." And I'm like, how do you tell it's dark if you've got nothing to compare it against, right? Like you can't see the darkness if all you are is in darkness. There is nothing to compare it against. The Radiant Citadel in some ways is like, it gives you enough light so that when you do go into a dark area, and when you face hardship, or you face brutal moments, it gives you like that, like, oh, I had it so good in the Radiant Citadel, and that was my home, and I have people back there I love, and I have a place I want to protect. Things are bad now, and like that, you do get to see the darkness, and it gives you perspective. So for the players who really do want to explore really hard moments, and you could create, the way that it's the really great thing about the Radiant Citadel is you can link it into your home campaign. Your anything, you can link it to the Forgotten Realms, anything that's existing in D&D, but your own home campaigns as well, your homebrews, whatever your world is, you can link in there. But it gives you that like that perspective, right? It gives you that difference from what else is going on there. I think that's really great.
Awesome. Okay, so then talk to us a little bit about the structure of the book. I think that there's a lot of different ways to approach this kind of thing. So like you can have your Pathfinder-esque adventure path, where it's like adventure 1, adventure 2, adventure 3, adventure 4. Sure. You can have kind of an anthology where it's like, you know, there's a little bit of setting connection, but really the adventures are distinct. You can kind of dip in and out. I think this book is doing something a little bit different than those two paradigms.
Yeah, we wanted to maximize players' enjoyments and DM's enjoyments with this. So you can start off at level 1. You can start off in the Radiant Citadel, and or you could start off in the first adventure, which is Salted Legacy, and you can play it straight. You can play it from the first level all the way to, if you finish the book, you will be 15th level by going through it. And actually, you can go just in order in the book, and you will get to 15th level from first level by the end of it. And that works 100%. You can also pull out any of these adventures and set them up pretty easily in established rules. In fact, we actually give you some instructions and some guidelines about how to drop this into Forgotten Realms, or Eberron, or Greyhawk, or Dragonlance, wherever you want to drop it into. The established D&D worlds, it's all possible. Simultaneously, we give you at least some advice or some thoughts about like how you might drop it into your homebrew. And really, the easiest way is each of the locations has something called a Concord Jewel linked to it. And think of it as like a giant gemstone shard. You know, I wish I had something in front of me that kind of gave an example of it, but like, just think of it like a shard, like a diamond shard or an emerald shard or ruby shard that is the size of a building. And this thing links to, it knows wherever this location is, and it was linked to that location. And it's like a transport vehicle. Like you can magically board into the interior of this Concord Jewel, and it will transport you. It'll fly into space, and then plane shift to the Radiant Citadel, and then it links to the Radiant Citadel. You get off the Radiant Citadel, and then you can take another Concord Jewel to another location, right? So you could drop any of these adventures wherever you wanted in your own homebrew, use a Concord Jewel to link it, then link it into the Radiant Citadel, and then that can transport you off to another place entirely. And the great thing is, we said that there's 15 that are known, right? But that's another 12 missing Concord Jewels. So if you've got an established home world, and you're like, hey, actually, none of these adventures, as they stand right now, none of the locations really make sense for my home, homebrew world. Great, no problem. Just say that like there's an obsidian Concord Jewel like buried in the earth, and your players, your characters, like they discover that obsidian Concord Jewel and they board it and figure out how to like maneuver it. They can reactivate it, and then they transport all the way to the Radiant Citadel. And from there, they can have new adventures in any of these lands. And so I think of it like as like an adventure path, in that like you can play from 1 to 15. And on the one hand, each of these locations are different. These adventures are different, but there's some recurring themes. There's some like even language elements, like one land's language evolved from another land's language. And you can tell that there may be trade between these different locations. Like there are like subtle and sometimes overt, like even some of the myths of 3 of the different lands are linked to each other. And so there are recurring themes and elements that create kind of an adventure path. And I almost think of it more of a life path for your character. Like as you go through these adventures, your character will grow and see recurring themes in the adventures, and they will have people that make sense as NPCs that connect between these different places. So you have a life path through from 1st to 15th level through there. But then also you can think of it as an anthology where you're just taking pieces of different adventures or these locations. I mean, you might even just be like, hey, I kind of really love Sunset Lawn. Sunset Lawn is one of the locations in the book, and it's based off of the adventure Fiend of a Hollow Mine. And so you play this adventure Fiend of a Hollow Mine, you find yourself in the city of Sunset Lawn. Great. You're like, well, I don't want to really play the adventure. The adventure is mind-boggling good, but for whatever reason, it's not your thing. But you really want to use the city of Sunset Lawn. Pick up the city, and like each section has a gazetteer that kind of fleshes out the culture, the people, the areas really well. So you can pull that into your own homebrew really easily. And players can make it their background, right? They can be like, hey, I'm from Sunset Lawn, and like, oh, I got all these different things here that like tell me about like characters I could build up from there. So there's a lot of options.
Nice. Okay. So we're going to go to some of the more cultural conversations that you've had about this. But before I do that, is there anything about the product itself that you wanted to talk about and make sure we foreground that we haven't covered already?
No, I've been enjoying the conversation, Jason. I think we've been covering some really great stuff. I just want to say there's a lot, like, we could spend hours to kind of dissecting the book, and I'm trying to be careful because like can't talk too much before the book is out. So I already gave away like a section of the book that hadn't been revealed. I read something that hadn't been revealed. So your viewers are going to get a little bit of an extra.
Not too bad. There's plenty. There's going to be plenty in this book. And I might even kind of talk about that when the supplement actually comes out.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you talk about releasing a book that is primarily written by people of color, right? You're going to get a segment of the population that is pushbacky, right? So I will just ask it straight away. A question that I saw I literally saw this question in the chat. Why do you hate white people? Why do you want to exclude white people?
Oh, I definitely. Well, first of all, I don't hate white people. My co-lead.
That's like the first thing, though, right? It's okay. Like, when people say, "Okay, this is a diversity thing," and it's like, "Oh, well, they're excluding. They're being so exclusionary," and they say they're for inclusion, but they're not including me. And like, you get all these feelings, right? And I just want to like kind of hit that idea. And I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear it from how you would articulate that kind of pushback.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my co-lead Wes Snyder is a white man, and there are some great white people who've worked on this book in really important ways and incredibly supportive. Not the least being the 2 game architects for D&D as a whole, Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins, who are super supportive and champions for the book. The second thing is the book focuses, and it was written entirely by people of color with their cultures and their histories and their legends and their myths, because it hasn't been done before. And that's kind of mind-blowing. You're like 50 years of D&D and we've never seen brown and black writers write their own stories into D&D. I mean, like there have been people of color that written for D&D so rarely and so sporadically. I did it for Rand Richton's Guide, which actually had a pretty decent representation, but it's hard, right? You don't see a lot of it, and so this isn't like being exclusive to anybody. This is just a celebration and saying, hey, this book is really devoted, and we want to give space and time to the stories of people of color, and we want to share that with all of you. This is for everybody. Like this book is for everybody.
Yeah, I think people focus on the from aspect of it. Like it's not just about the from, it's about the for as well.
Yeah.
Like it's from certain cultures and perspectives, but it's for everybody. And maybe some of the way that it was shared out, some of the headlines kind of gives a different impression. But I feel that, right? I feel that this is something that is for the entire gaming, and that there's something here for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think the headlines were important in that, like, often people of color, their stories get forgotten or not acknowledged, and when something big happens for us, we don't get to celebrate it, right? And we don't make the headlines, and we don't cheer for our successes. And so it was kind of great to see a lot of headlines kind of emphasize that and cheer for it. And we shouldn't have to apologize for having a success. We shouldn't have to apologize for having a book that's ours. Like, there's been plenty of D&D books with all white writers, and like, no one's apologized for those books being all white writers, right? Tons of them have been all white writers. I mean, for years that might have been only all white writers, and like nobody apologized to that. So like, I don't think.
Yeah, but they would never identified as all white writers. They would just say, "I'm a writer." And like, and the idea that like this is introducing race, and this is introducing a divisive concept, where before it was like people writing. Now, why is the identity so important? I think that's the perspective people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because it's like identity is not important when you're the mainstream, when everything is written by you for you, right? I think when we say like, they don't identify as white writers, it's only because like the default of every way we think about things is like, hey, what's normal is white, right? Like what's mainstream is white. Right. So I don't need to like explain that I'm white, because like that's just what we expect it to be. And then like when you want to say that like it's not white, and you actually want to talk about that, then it has like this qualifier to it. But if we don't talk about the fact that I'm not white, and then I'm not talking about a white story, then it gets erased and kind of forgotten. And we do talk about the skin colors of different NPCs you see in there, and we talk about what the people look like, because I know otherwise a person's imagination is like, oh, that's just a person, and that person doesn't have a skin color, that person's going to be white, right? Every
time I see, because I've worked as a cultural consultant for the last year now, and I'll have people come to me, it's like, okay, we didn't want to map anything onto this. We just wanted a halfling race. We just wanted a thing race. I'm looking at it going, that's a white guy. and I think some people are gonna think that's like, oh, you're just putting it in there while you're noticing or whatever it is. It's like, that's one where it's like, you have to kind of walk a mile in a person's shoes. Like you have to understand, from our perspective, going to the Gen Cons, going to the other things. I think I love what you said at like the beginning of our show, where like you would be at a place and you just hear stuff. Maybe somebody would pop off an accent or pop off some kind of idiom, or up who are you that whole thing, and people wonder like, oh, why is that offensive? Like, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Apu himself, but like if that's your only exposure Indian culture, then that's going to be a little bit difficult.
I mean, I grew up with people asking me all the time, I was like, your parents work in a gas station or a convenience store, like, because that's the only cultural reference they had for India. And it's like, no, actually my dad's a businessman, my mom's an accountant, but like you only see, Indians working gas stations or convenience stores, because Apu is your cultural reference in media, or whatever version of Indians is like kind of a punchline to white culture, right? And that's why this book is so important, because you got a bunch of brown and black people, you got a lot of people of color talking about their cultures, their lands, their history, and they're getting away from those tropes, right? They're telling their truths through these stories, and it's pretty powerful, pretty magical, and it's a great adventure because of it. Like you get like such incredible adventures, just like people are gonna like lose their minds of how cool and neat and different. And they're like, oh wow, I didn't realize, you know, China could be this complicated, or I didn't realize India has all of this stuff going on, and I didn't realize Mexico has all of these different things going on, and there's just so much richness there that I learned a lot reading all of the other writers and what they had put into this book.
It's a treat. You can eat Mexican at Taco Bell, or you could go to Mexico and have your mind blown. That is the shift that we're looking at here. You mentioned before about, like, you know, the rooms, right? I mean, we have a lot of like white writers who wrote a lot of the perspectives, and that happened for a long time. So I think that the struggle, right, to get hired, to have our submissions, you know, accepted, that's not visible. You know, I think there's this idea that like, okay, well, if you're good, you'll, you know, get accepted at these places. And, you know, the fact that it's taken so long for a POC presence to make itself manifest is just because, you know, we just weren't around. And it just so happens that like in the last couple of years, there's more of us around. So, you know, there it is. So like, I know you haven't, you know, you can only speak from your perspective, but maybe talk a little bit about like some of the barriers that you're aware of that were there before this supplement.
Yeah, you know, I can only speak, as you said, I can only speak to my perspective, but you know, Jason, I can't tell you how many times I've had like a nice guy, like a nice white guy who's like, you know, smart, creative, and doing some good stuff. And I would present some ideas to him, and he'd say, you know, hey, Ajit, like, oh, I really appreciate, you know, you're talented. I see a lot of good skills here, but your idea is not quite the right culture fit for what we're looking at. You know, it's not the right culture fit.
Wow,
and I get the
an actual phrase, culture fit.
Yeah. I would get the culture fit kind of thing quite often because I started putting just brown characters into like some of my work, or I'd start putting like, you know, hints of India into my work, and it's like, oh, you're looking for Celtic. Oh, okay. You're looking for Viking, like, and that's the only kind of like frame of reference. It's just, you keep on drawing from that same well of like Vikings or Celtic or, you know, Druidic or whatever is going on there, as kind of like this, like your fantasy version is just again and again from a certain set of expectations. And then when you have those set of expectations and the leads are on that certain set of expectations, like a game designer is like coming from that perspective, then yeah, you aren't the right culture fit for them because they're not really thinking about what it looks like to create a fantasy world or characters that are not white or that are not from, you know, the 4 or 5 kind of areas that we keep on seeing again and again and again. So that's why a book like this has become so important, because like I'm the co-project lead and it's my vision, right? Like I'm the one who created this, and I had some very specific vision guides about how to like engage with this stuff, but then I gave a lot of like room and space to the writers to make their right culture fit for their section, right? Right. And the Radiant Citadel is a culture fit for a lot of different cultures because it was built like that, right? It's New York City, and New York City's for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't accuse anybody of anything. I mean, I think again, a thing that people can assume is like, okay, well, we're calling a bunch of people racist for being exclusionary and everything. That like maybe a percent of a percent is actually racist, but like for the most part, it's a bunch of people who are comfortable with what is familiar.
Yeah.
And who could be a little bit risk averse about like, okay, will people buy this different thing? Like, I know this center thing will sell. Will people buy the new thing? So it's like, in a way, it's like, oh, well, the market is speaking. The market is telling me to put elves and dwarves and forests and all this other stuff in there, druids and that kind of thing. So I think that I think what you're describing is like, okay, it's not like active, you know, walls closing in with spikes, barriers, kind of pushing people out. It's these kind of soft little ways that a person who doesn't maybe have like that, you know, that stick-to-itiveness, and it's like, okay, you know, they write something, they get pushed away, and then it's like, okay, I'm just going to go to something else.
Yeah, I don't think most gamers are racist, right? I think like most gamers are awesome and they love games and they're good people. But I think human beings, by our very nature, we kind of like we focus on ourselves, right? We think about ourselves in like our own small box first, and we're also a lot of human beings are kind of risk averse. I think a lot of people think they're more like they're more daring than they actually are, and they don't want to take risks, and they like the safety, like their comfort zone of what they are already familiar with, and what is like feels like home for them, and what feels like what they grew up with when they were a kid. And if you were white and you grew up with all white friends in an all white neighborhood and all white kind of culture, then like something that's out of that is really unfamiliar and feels really kind of weird and uncomfortable and maybe a little dangerous. And that's real tough for them to kind of get used to. But the antidote to that is to take that risk and to jump and leap and go like, you know what, I'm going to play this game, even though it's so different what I'm used to by people that I'm not really familiar with, that I didn't grow up with, and I don't know as well. And I'm going to engage with that. And I think that like, I think most of your viewers are going to have a great time with that because they're going to find something that is going to feel familiar. Like there's a lot of things, we're all human beings at the end of the day. So like, there's a lot of familiar human stories, fundamental human stories that continue to reoccur. Love and fear and hope and anger, like those themes are running through the adventure again and again and again.
And
and
greed
ambition.
with a million
and
hands.
There's so many greedy characters in this book. Like there's a lot of motivation by greed. And a lot of motivation by power hungriness or and by fear, and but also by love and by like the fight to do good, right? And that battle too, right? So that's human. That's fundamentally human, but you're going to get it from a different cultural perspective, and I think that's going to be incredibly powerful.
And at the end of the day, I mean, as much as it kind of sucks that to say, okay, this has to be really good. The old standards like, okay, a POC has to work twice as hard to get half as far, all that kind of thing. But it's like, if we can pull off something really quality, like think of like a Black Panther type things. Like we can't have all Black leads in like a big, 10-pole franchise, boom, $1 billion worldwide success. Wow. And it comes straight from the like an African Afrofuturist perspective. So like if it's good, then we can break barriers. And I think that's kind of what ultimately where we're going to land with this is that, the question is, okay, I don't want to hear about diversity. Is this good? Okay. How about both? You're going to hear about the diversity and you're going to hear how freaking good this promises to be.
That's 100%. I mean, your words could have taken from my own lips, Jason. Like
I've been thinking about this ever since, man.
I mean, all of us who worked on this were like excited as hell. We knew we were working on something bigger than ourselves, that like the sum of this was bigger than all of the parts, and that this book and what we were creating was so important that every single one of us had to do our absolute best. And we were sweating bullets, we were working late nights, we were revising draft after draft after draft. We were pushing ourselves to the limits because we knew we had to do this perfect. And we had to be as good as humanly possible. And I can't promise you this book is perfect. There are flaws in everything. We're human beings. We can only do as good as we can do. But this book is amazing. And I have read almost every D&D book that's ever been put out there. I would rank this in the top 5. Like there is something incredibly powerful and magical about this book. It does so much. It will open your mind. It will pull away your perspectives and your expectations. It is just so well written. It's so smart. The art is some of the best art that's ever been in a D&D book. I don't know how much of you've seen it, but there's been art floating out there, and they're just really rich and beautiful pieces of art. It just all comes together. And we knew we had to do it that way. We're like, we can't do average because like then people are gonna be like, well, yeah,
you had your one shot.
You have your one shot, and you got to take that shot, and you got to do your absolute best. And I think all of us, we all knew that was working on it. It was hard, Can't tell you how many times I cried working on this book. Like I shed so many tears over this book. I was so worried, and I was so like stressed, and I can tell you all the other writers felt it too. We all felt like we were working on something bigger and more important than each of us as individuals. And so we put our heart and soul into this book. And I think it will show when you get it and you read through it. and sit with it and read through it again, each time you read through it, you can be like, whoa, there's some more things going on here that I didn't see the first time.
And so my sincere hope, just in closing, is not that it's not just that it's excellent, and I have every confidence that it will be, but that it will influence. Like this is the first of something, and that RPG writers and board gamers and movie makers and whoever else is making geek stuff will take this baton that is being handed to us by our friend and run with it and create their own thing. That is the ultimate, play forward that I'm hoping for. And that's what this interview is all about, is just trying to get the word out and spread this to as far as possible. So I mean, that is the project. It's coming out in July. We'll see. It got pushed back once, so you never know about these things. What else are you working on? And where else can we find your work, and how can we follow you a little bit more closely in terms of your creative endeavors?
Yeah, you can see me. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Ajit George SB on Twitter, or if you just Google my name, you'll end up seeing a lot of stuff from my nonprofit work and my website. I'm actually really looking forward to a vampire LARP. I like World of Darkness. I don't know how much of your viewers like World of Darkness, but I'm big.
We had a LARP episode. Oh, what? No, it's all in it. We yes.
Oh, maybe you should interview with these guys. So the two creators there's a LARP called Saturnalia, and it's in New Orleans. And my wife and I are both going. She's in games as well. She's a video game director for D&D video game. And we're going to go out to New Orleans, and they're doing this 2-day LARP. And one day is on a steamboat, and there's like these 6 Hudon practitioners that are going to be like creating this ritual of a funeral. And there's all sorts of weird shit going on with it. But I'm going to be in New Orleans for 2 days, and that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to. I'm not really part of the leadership of it, but they've asked for creative ideas, and I've kind of been participating and kind of putting in some stuff in there, and they've been really receptive to it. So that's my big next creative project. I'm working on a couple other things too, but a little early to announce it. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
This has been so good. I am very excited about this project. As a refugee D&D player from back in the day, I'm hoping to get RPGs back in my life as a professional, and then my personal life as well. So this has been really good. Ajit George, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for having me on.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.